Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The red Martian dust swirled outside the window of a small cabin David Prescott now called home. Once he had stood in the center of Earth, the greatest halls of power, commanding the attention of millions as the president of the Earth Federation. Now he sat alone, isolated on a foreign world, forgotten by the people he had once sworn to lead. The walls of his self-imposed exile felt suffocating, and though Mars offered endless horizons of barren land, he couldn't escape the weight of his failure. He rubbed his temples and exhaled slowly, staring blankly at the faint light of the Martian dawn creeping through the window. Each day was a reminder of the election he had lost, one marred by political betrayal, smear campaigns, and false accusations. He had retreated to Mars, hoping to disappear. It had been a quiet escape, one that offered no closure, but at least the silence was bearable. Here, no one expected anything from him anymore, or so he thought. The soft chime of his communication console broke through his thought. David's eyes narrowed as he glanced at the screen. A message from Sophia Cole, one of the head scientists at the Mars Colony Medical Division. He hadn't spoken to her in weeks. Curiosity nudged him toward the console, and with a reluctant sigh, he pressed the button to accept the message. Sophia's face appeared on the screen, her sharp eyes reflecting urgency, her brow furrowed in concern. David, I need to talk to you. It's such important. He leaned back, folding his arms over his chest. I told you, Sophia. I am done with all of that. I am not here to fix anyone's problems anymore. Her expression hardened. This isn't about politics. This is about survival. David hesitated. Oh. We've got a problem on Mars, a big one there, said the virus spreading through the colony, something we've never seen before. It's killing people fast. We were calling it dust fever. It's nice, respiratory, airborne, and highly contagious. Our resources here are limited, and without outside help,
we're on the brink of collapse.
David's heart sank. He had expected some mundane crisis, a supply shortage, a malfunction in the colony system. But this, a deadly virus. He had seen enough plagues on Earth to know the damage one could do to a closed system, like the Mars colony. What do you want from me? I need your help, your connections. You have the knowledge, the access to resources, and more importantly, you know how to lead. We can do this without you. David shook his head. I am not that man anymore. Sophia, you know that. I don't care who you think you are. People are dying, David. And it's going to get a lot worse unless someone steps up. You may not be president anymore, but you are still the only one who can get us through this. The weight of her words hung in the air. He wanted to refuse, to turn away and stay hidden in the dust of Mars. But deep down, he knew he couldn't. The responsibilities of leadership were ingrained in his bones, no matter how far he had run from them. David ran a hand through his graying hair and let out a heavy sigh. Fine, I'll see what I can do. But don't expect a miracle. Sophia's face softened, the tension easing slightly from her shoulders. That's all I am asking for. The Mars colony was in worse shape than David had imagined as he stepped out into the central hub. He saw the signs of decay everywhere, panicked colonists huddled in small groups, fear etched into their faces, medical staff rushing between makeshift quarantine zones, and the unmistakable scent of disinfectant heavy in the air. Dust fever had already claimed dozens of lives, and the medical team was struggling to contain it. Sophia met him at the entrance to the medical facility, her face drawn and tired. She wore a mask, though it seemed more out of habit than any real protection. I am glad you came, she said, her voice muffled through the fabric. David nodded, his gaze drifting over the crowded corridors. Tell me what we were dealing with. Sophia led him inside, where the air was thick with the tension of the dying. We've confirmed over 100 cases in the past week. It spreads fast, attacks the lungs, and once symptoms show, it's usually fatal within 72 hours. Right, we've tried everything in our arsenal, antivirals, oxygen therapy, even experimental treatments, but nothing's working. David followed her down the hallway to a small room where several colonists lay in beds, their faces pale and gaunt, their breaths labored and shallow in earth. He asked quietly. David had cut off communication, Sophia said, her voice tight. We sent out a distress signal days ago, but there's been no response. It's as if they've abandoned us. David's jaw clenched. He had always suspected that Earth-South's elite had little interest in the survival of the Mars colony, viewing it as an expendable experiment. But to abandon them in the middle of a crisis, it was unforgivable. Then we were on our own, he said, the reality settling in like a weight on his chest. Sophia nodded grimly. That's why we need you. You've dealt with crises like this before. You know how to get people moving, how to organize and find solutions when everything seems hopeless. David stared at the faces of the dying colonists. The fear in their eyes mingled with a faint glimmer of hope. It was the same look he had seen on Earth so many times during his presidency. The look of people desperate for someone to save them. I'll need access to all the colony's resources, he said finally, and I'll need a team I can trust. Sophia's relief was palpable. You'll have it. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. David took control of the situation with the same commanding presence he had once wielded on Earth. He reorganized the colony's infrastructure, creating quarantine zones, distributing scarce medical supplies, and rallying the colonists to work together. His first priority was finding a cure for dust fever, and for that he needed information, specifically the research data from Earth's top medical facility. But the more he dug into the situation, the more it became clear that this virus wasn't a natural occurrence. There were too many inconsistencies, too many signs that pointed to something more sinister. And when Elena Richter, the journalist who had followed him to Mars, approached him with her own findings, the full scope of the conspiracy began to unfold. I've been investigating the origins of dust fever, Elena said one evening as they met in a secluded corner of the colony. And I found something disturbing. This virus wasn't an accident. David, it was released deliberately. David's blood ran cold. By who? By Earth, as Elena said, her voice low. They want to destabilize the colony, make it ungovernable. They've been losing control over Mars, and they see this as a way to ensure they're dominant. If the colony falls apart, they can step in and take over under the guise of humanitarian aid. David stared at her, his mind reeling. He had always known that Earth's ruling class was ruthless, but this sacrificing lives for political gain, it was beyond monstrous. We need proof, he said, his voice tight with anger, something we can use to expose them. Elena nodded. I've been working on it, but we don't have much time. If we don't stop this virus soon, there won't be anyone left to save. David's thoughts raced. The stakes had just been raised. He wasn't just fighting a virus anymore. He was fighting a political conspiracy that threatened the very survival of the colony. He would need all his wits, all his experience to navigate the treacherous path ahead. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of the man he used to be, the leader who had once inspired hope in millions. And now with Mars hanging in the balance, he knew he couldn't afford to fail again. David paced in his small quarters, his mind spinning with the enormity of the conspiracy Elena had just revealed. The implications were staggering. Earth had not only abandoned Mars, but they had actively engineered its destruction, all to secure political and economic control over the colony. The virus, dust fever, was their weapon, a silent killer designed to cripple Mars, leaving it vulnerable for a takeover. David could feel the old fire stirring inside him. The same burning need to act that had once propelled him through crisis after crisis as president. He had walked away from public life haunted by the weight of his failures. But here was an opportunity, now a responsibility to prevent something far worse than any political defeat. This was about survival, not just for himself, but for the thousands of colonists who had no idea they were pawns in a much larger game. He had to move quickly. The virus was spreading, and without immediate action, the colony would collapse. He reached for his communicator, calling Sophia. Meet me in the control room in 10 minutes, he said, his voice steady. We need to talk. 10 minutes later, David stood in front of a large digital map of the colony, highlighting the spread of the virus. Sophia arrived, looking exhausted but determined. She'd been working tirelessly to slow the progression of dust fever, but even her genius had limits. We're running out of time, Sophia said bluntly, scanning the data on the screen. If we don't find a cure soon, the entire colony will be infected within a matter of weeks. The quarantine zones are barely holding. David nodded. I know, but I think we were dealing with something more than a simple outbreak. He quickly filled her in on what Elena had uncovered. Sophia's face hardened as he spoke, her mind racing through the implications. So they engineered the virus. Deliberately, David confirmed. They want Mars to fail. If we collapse, they come in as saviors, bringing their aid and taking control. We need to expose them. But first, we need a cure, something to stop this, before they get what they want. Sophia stared at the map for a long moment. If this virus is engineered, that means there's a weakness. There has to be a backdoor, a way to stop it. That's all I was hoping you'd say, David replied, a flicker of hope returning to his voice. We need access to Earth's medical research data, the classified files. Do you have any contacts left there? Anyone we can trust? Sophia considered this for a moment, her brow furrowing. I might know someone, but it's risky. Earth has cut off communication with Mars, and I doubt anyone loyal to the government will be eager to help us. Get in touch with them, David urged. We don't have any other option. Sophia nodded, already formulating a plan in her head. She left the control room without another word, her focus entirely on the task ahead. David, on the other hand, remained by the map, watching. As the red zones marking infected areas slowly expanded, time was running out. As he stood there, deep in thought, Colonel Adrian Ramirez entered the room. The hard-nosed leader of the colony's defense forces had never been one for subtlety, and tonight was no exception. You've got your hands full, Prescott, Ramirez said, his voice gruff. This colony sent on the verge of collapse, and you're talking about some conspiracy theory. We need order, not wild accusation. David turned to face him, his expression unreadable. It's not a theory. It's in the truth. Ramirez folded his arms, unimpressed. Even if it is what sure plan, stir up panic. We barely have enough men to keep the quarantine zone secure as it is. David took a deep breath. He understood Ramirez's frustration, but he also knew the stakes were too high to ignore. The virus was engineered. Earth cell leadership wants this colony to fall so they can seize control. If we don't stop it, we won't just lose lives. We'll lose Mars. Ramirez's eyes narrowed. And you expect me to believe that after everything that's happened, you want me to trust you again? David held his gaze. I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to do what you've always done, protect this colony. But to do that, we need to work together. We can't afford to be divided right now. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then, finally, Ramirez exhaled heavily and shook his head. Fine, I'll play along for now. But if this blows up in our faces, it's set on you. David nodded. Fair enough. The following days passed in a blur of activity. Sophia worked tirelessly to establish contact with her Earth-based ally, a scientist named Dr. Marshall, who had once been a trusted colleague in the Federation's medical division. Meanwhile, David focused on keeping the colony together, organizing food and medical supply distributions, and coordinating efforts with the defense forces to maintain order. The virus, however, was relentless. More colonists fell ill, and the quarantine zones grew increasingly strained. Tensions rose as food and water shortages began to take hold, and the specter of civil unrest loomed on the horizon. Small groups of colonists, disillusioned by the lack of progress and desperate for answers, began to voice their anger openly. One evening, as David sat reviewing reports in his quarters, a knock at the door interrupted his thought. He opened it to find Alina standing there, her face flushed with urgency. We need to talk, she said, stepping inside. David gestured for her to sit. What is it? I feel up and digging deeper into the conspiracy, Alina said, lowering her voice. There's more to this than we realized. I've found evidence that the virus was developed long before the election. This plan was in motion for years, and it's a faction on Earth that has been waiting for the right moment to strike. David's stomach churned. How far does it go? Far enough that even some of your former allies were involved, Alina replied grimly. This wasn't true just about taking down the colony. It was about taking you down too. You were a threat to their long-term plan. The betrayal felt like a physical blow, but David knew better than to let it show. He had always suspected that the political games on Earth ran deeper than he could fully grasp, but this was personal. Do we have any proof? He asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil reeling inside him. Alina nodded. I've got records, communications between key figures, all of it. But we need a way to get this information out. If we don't, they'll destroy us before we have a chance. David seemed to embrace Sophia CR working on contacting someone who can help. We'll get this to Earth, but we need to stabilize the colony first. If we don't stop the virus, none of this will matter. Just as Elena opened her mouth to respond, the door to his quarters slid open again, and Sophia rushed in, her face flushed with excitement. I got through, she announced breathlessly. Dr. Marshall has the data we need. He's going to transmit everything in the next few hours, but we need to act fast. Earth is monitoring all communications. If they catch wind of this, they'll shut us down. David Suyat's heart leapt. This was the break they needed. Let's get it done. The next few hours passed in tense anticipation. Sophia coordinated with Dr. Marshall, securing the medical research they needed to develop a cure for dust fever. But the closer they got to finding a solution, the more dangerous the situation became. Earth's elite had already gone to great lengths to destroy Mars, and they wouldn't hesitate to finish the job if they realized their plan was unraveling. When the data finally arrived, Sophia wasted no time in analyzing it. The room was filled with a hushed tension as David, Ramirez, and Elena watched her work, their futures hanging on the results of her finding. After what felt like an eternity, Sophia straightened and turned to face them, her expression triumphant. "There is a way to neutralize the virus," she said, her voice filled with relief. "It's complicated, but with the right resources, we can produce an antidote." David's shoulders sagged with relief. "How long?" "A few days if everything goes smoothly," Sophia replied, "but we need full cooperation from the colony. No more infighting." Ramirez crossed his arms, his expression hard. "That's easier said than done. People are scared, and scared people don't listen to reason." David nodded. "Then we'll make them listen." As they prepared to roll out the plan to the colony, David couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't through yet. Earth's elite weren't the type to give up easily, and if they realized that Mars had a chance of survival, they would stop at nothing to ensure its destruction. But for the first time in a long while, David felt a spark of hope. The colony had been brought to the brink, but now they had a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless. It was up to him and the people around him to seize it.